Thanks everyone, thank you for inviting me here to this very interesting and innovative event. I think coming from UNESCO, we don't come to a lot of these sorts of things that are very innovative. Maybe when you think of UNESCO and the UN, you don't think of innovation straight away, maybe a little bit the opposite, right? So it's good for us to be able to come here and show some of the things that we're doing to kind of tackle some of these challenges of the 21st century. So, to introduce the campaign, I'm going to play a little video that explains exactly what the campaign is in the background, and then I'll talk about some of the kind of processes we went through and how we developed it. So with that.
Shocking images of the unprecedented attacks on the world's cultural heritage by extremists. Never before in recent history have we seen such brutal and systematic destruction of cultural heritage used as a tactic of war to intimidate populations and disseminate hatred. The destruction of heritage is a war crime.
This is a danger not only for Iraq, but for all of humankind. This is why we have shared responsibility to protect this culture, because it is the culture and civilization of humankind. We have an urgent need of support to fight against trafficking. We will work together.
UNESCO has brought together experts to assess damages and craft emergency responses, in close cooperation with its networks and heritage stakeholders, including conservation professionals on the ground.
What we were trying to do, and we, I think, succeeded in doing it, is putting the dots together, putting the security concerns and the destruction of culture, cultural diversity, and protecting of heritage on the same, I would say, level.
Nous avons récupéré pendant la crise 6000 objets faits par la police et la douane Interpol syrienne, et nous avons remarqué, nous avons une estimation sur la qualité des objets, mais il y a autant des objets qui sont partis en Europe, mais on ne sait pas exactement.
The Unite for Heritage campaign was conceived in response to this unprecedented destruction, to reaffirm UNESCO's core values, cultural diversity, tolerance and understanding. In March 2015, the Director General launched the campaign at the University of Baghdad. Unite for Heritage is supported by UNESCO field officers and our partners across the Arab region and around the world, with activities on the ground involving thousands of young people. The campaign encourages them to connect with their cultural heritage and identity through events, concerts, workshops, training and site visits. We call on all governments and institutions to get involved in the Unite for Heritage campaign. Spread the word to your networks and partners, organize a campaign event, contribute to the Heritage Emergency Fund, and one thing you can do right now is join the conversation online and tell the world why cultural heritage matters. Unite for Heritage has become the go-to online conversation about celebrating and safeguarding cultural heritage around the world. Thousands of people have posted messages of support and shared examples of the cultural heritage that matters to them. This is a global problem that needs a global response. We call on the whole world to stand up and unite for heritage.
I guess everyone saw what happened, especially with Palmyra, with Hatra, with other World Heritage Sites. But also importantly, it was about people and communities. So it wasn't just buildings and stones that were attacked, but it was also ethnic and cultural minorities, for example, the Yazidis in Iraq, they were attacked for their culture. And it was really an attack on cultural diversity, and that's what the campaign was kind of launched in response to. And this is where it became more about the general idea of celebrating culture, celebrating diversity, and it became really sort of a contribution to the overall battle against violent extremism and radicalization of young people. So that was obviously, it still is a big problem. You have people from all over the world, and even here in Europe, traveling to join these groups in Iraq and Syria. There's been famous cases of those 3 British girls, 15 and 16, that were just sort of, you know, upstairs in their bedrooms talking on the internet, and the parents had no idea. They then told their parents they were staying at each other's houses and ended up booking flights to Turkey and going into Syria, and that was the last time they were seen. So the idea is to contribute to that, to be part of the kind of solution. It's not going to be the solution for everything, and it's only going to be kind of a part of it. But I just want to sort of talk about some of the things that we did and sort of some of the considerations, and I want to use it as an example of what could be done to create what we call an alternative narrative, a campaign that's an alternative narrative for people like this. So I think, first of all, and maybe it sounds a little obvious, but it can't be something that's dictated from above. So something that needs to come from people. We mentioned in the video we call on governments and institutions to get involved. That's because we made the video for a particular event targeted towards governments and institutions. The campaign was always going to be about people. We say it's not on there, maybe it's over here. We say powered by UNESCO, which is our way of saying that something that we've launched, we hope to kind of catalyze the discussion, but we don't want to take control of it, we don't want to moderate it. And with the hashtag, it's not something you can actually do anyway. You don't really have that control. And that's actually, for us, that was a big advantage, because people could talk about what they wanted to talk about. And we had great institutional support. So this is our Director, going back, this is our Director General standing with all the heads of the UN agencies, for example, with the hashtag. At the start, there was this idea about, you know, taking a photo with the hashtag. That was the kind of thing that we were doing, and it became quickly clear that we needed to do something more than that, to go beyond that, because it became very repetitive, and we had to keep coming up with new ideas that were interesting. So it was good we had this institutional support, but like I said, it needs to really become about people. Secondly, it can't exist online. It was an online campaign, but it can't exist only online without support on the ground. So we did a whole lot of activities. You saw some in the video, and there's a few examples here. This was in Petra in Jordan. There's an artist that goes to sites and does musical performances and records them to kind of capture the sound of the site, which was kind of an interesting thing. So there were cultural performances. We especially focused on young people, having young people involved in different things. The idea is they learn about their own culture, their own heritage. They learn about the heritage of other people, and they learn about the value of sharing all the kind of diversity that we have in the world. They also learnt how to repair and sort of care for heritage sites and other things like that. So it was cultural, but also kind of practical skills that they could learn. And we initially focused especially on the Arab region for these activities. We had all of our field officers around the region doing a lot of different activities with young people there. So there's been about, I think, 10,000 or so young people involved so far in these kind of things. And it's been going for just over a year, the campaign. Some more young people there. This one actually up here, the one at the top right is from Cairo. They did a kind of hands around the pyramid kind of situation. They had 2,000 people joining arms around the Great Pyramid to kind of make a statement of solidarity and defiance against extremism. And then even in Europe, well, actually, sorry, on the left, this is in Mali, and this is one of our good sort of success stories of people say, well, you have this campaign, what can you actually achieve? And this is something that was achieved when sort of extremist groups in the north of Mali, in Timbuktu, destroyed a lot of mausolea and mosques, and they were rebuilt with the help of UNESCO, but importantly by local craftsmen, traditional craftsmen, to rebuild them. So that's one of our stories we look at as something that we can point to and say, okay, this is an example of something that could be done. And when we talk about Palmyra now, so the site has been kind of, well, it's complicated, but taken back, you could say, and then now the conversation is starting about exactly what can be done to rebuild and to rehabilitate the site. And then this is from, you saw in the video there was a statue covered in black that was from Florence in Italy. So a lot of Italian cities came together and they did a whole lot of sort of things to support the campaign. And this is in the central square of Rome. And they covered a statue on a bridge in Florence in black as a kind of show of solidarity as well. But of course, the campaign needs to, I mean, the central focus of the campaign was the online conversation. It's a social media campaign at heart. And we wanted to do everything we could to we wanted everything we did to contribute back onto this. And this is another important point. So you do these things on the ground, you have these activities, but everything feeds back into the online conversation and everything ends up kind of in this one central place. And we called it like a conversation of record about these issues. And you can also see it has a bit of a dual identity. So it's about heritage and a response to what happened, but it's about also this idea of extremism and radicalization and helping people. And so we're not advocating for censorship of these extremist groups necessarily. I mean, I think you could definitely make an argument that what they are saying would be hate speech, so it could fall under that idea of kind of regulation. But I think it's more important to provide what we call an alternative narrative. So it's not just people always talk about counter narratives. It's sort of a direct counter against these things that the Daesh are saying and other groups. But for us, it's really about alternative narratives. And I think this has been a big problem with the response so far. There's been a lot of, I think governments especially have launched a lot of sort of initiatives to look at the issue. So the US has one called Think Again, Turn Away. And France launched one called Stop Jihadism. And they're good campaigns, they're important, and I think they have a really important point to make. But what they do is just deconstruct the narratives of the extremist groups. They don't really replace it with anything. They say, you know, the French one, for example, it sort of takes videos from Daesh and it actually ends up diffusing them further because it uses the violent imagery that these groups use. And then it just kind of says, they tell you this, well actually it's like this. They talk about the reality and things like that. So it's, I think what we decided what was needed was something to replace it with, something people could believe in, something they could be a part of, and things like that. And it's the same for the social media networks. So they're heavily involved in deleting accounts and censoring content and deleting accounts, removing messages that they find offensive. But it's kind of like a game of, do you know what I mean? If I say whack-a-mole, do you know what I'm talking about? That kind of arcade game where you have to hit the moles that pop out. And the idea is that however many you hit, more of them will pop up. And so it's never going to work. A group like Daesh, for example, I mean, there's different numbers out there, but our research suggests that they produce up to 100,000 messages a day between them and their network of supporters. So we're never going to be able to kind of counter that through what we're doing. But if you could instead replace these messages with ones of tolerance and sort of maybe if people are searching for extremist content, you could point them instead to places where they can find resources and where they can get skills that they need to get a sense of belonging, to participate in societies. I think for me this is where the kind of thinking is going, where it needs to happen. So as I said, we're never expecting this to be some kind of magic bullet that solves the problem, but we see it as part of it. We see it as part of the solution, and it's kind of a model for an alternative narrative that then could form the basis for an expanded global campaign. I think there's real problems that these people face in terms of their lives. They have, if we talk about radicalization as an example, unemployment, a lack of access to education and sort of a disillusionment in society, disenfranchisement, and these messages of tolerance and peace and love, I guess you could say, we say sometimes we don't want it to be true peace and love because it's disconnected from reality, and that can't necessarily address that. But we see this as part of the overall solution and perhaps a model for another campaign. And if you think about it, it shouldn't be difficult. So if I talk about what I had before, you have these extremist groups on either end, and then you have 99% of people in between. So all we need is something for that vast majority of people in the middle where they can stand up together and say we reject extremism and violence and division and hatred and we want to live together in peace. And I don't think it's going to come from the UN necessarily, I don't think it's going to come from governments. even though we're all working very hard on solutions. But it's going to come from regular people coming together to stand up for what they believe in. So it's going to come from people like you.